Many of you have probably heard how the demand for artillery shells has skyrocketed with the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. Maybe you have also heard pop media talking about the 155mm shell. But what actually makes this shell so sought after, and why is nearly every Western country using it for their artillery pieces? This caliber didn't actually just come to be. It goes much deeper than that. Let me explain. First, we need to go back in time about 150 years. In the 1870s, when the French were defeated by Prussia, their committee came together to discuss how they would improve their siege artillery for the future. After going back and forth a little, the committee finally settled on the caliber of 155mm in the form of the Debange 155 cannon. Decades went by, and then the Great War began. Europe was on fire once again. At this point, the old 155 guns were widely forgotten about, as new army doctrines tended to favor lighter and smaller weapons. Despite this, they were ordered to be used in the conflict. And to everyone's surprise, the 155mm weapons were actually very good for things such as counter-battery fire and general destruction. Where the lighter 75 and 105mm guns lacked range or power, the 155 didn't. One by one, the worn-out original guns were replaced by newer guns of the same caliber. But the 1870s guns still carried the torch, improving the 155mm heavy artillery. During the years between the World Wars, the United States was keen on modernizing their artillery, and after many studies and trials, it was determined that the 155mm shell was a good choice as their main heavy artillery. In 1939, they retired their now obsolete French Schneider 155C model 1917 guns. In 1941, the new M1 155mm howitzer was ready to field. During the Battle for Normandy, the M1 gained a reputation for good precision, range, ease of maintenance, and reasonable weight. As the Second World War ended, the tensions didn't. The West had found a new threat to their ideologies in the form of the Soviet Union. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was founded to form a collective security against new threats, such as the ever-growing power of the Soviet Union. Along with its articles, NATO also sought to standardize weapons and calibers, among many other things. One of these calibers was the heavy 155mm artillery shell. So what actually makes this size of shell so good? See, the gun caliber almost directly determines the logistics because as your caliber increases, so does the weapon system weight, shell weight, and manpower required to haul these guns and shells. The 155mm shell is a very good balance in this regard, as it still offers most of the benefits of being a large enough shell to take out almost anything it hits, and having a good area of effect but avoiding most of the disadvantages of bigger calibers. For example, the basic 155mm high explosive shell weighs around 43 kilograms. What this means is a single soldier can generally still handle this shell. But if we were to jump to, let's say, to 203mm, sure, we would get some more destructive power and range, but the shell would weigh around 110 kilograms. This generally means that a single soldier can't really handle this shell. This, in turn, adds weight to the entire progress from manufacturing to delivering the shells. The artillery pieces and equipment would also scale up along, not to mention the price and manpower required. And when it impacts, it might not do much that the 155mm shell wouldn't have done just as well. The construction of the standard 155mm shell is simple but good. Inside the shell, we find the explosive material, most commonly being trottle. Encasing the explosives is the forged body that will break into small lethal fragments when the shell detonates. Outside, we have the driving band, made out of a softer metal like brass. This band will deform against the harder rifling of the gun barrel, making the shell spin. On the bottom, various base units can be added to improve the ballistic characteristics of the shell. Some common options are base bleed or base burn units. On the top is the threaded fuse well, and on top is where the fuse is installed. Commonly, the fuse is only installed by the troops when they are ready to use the shell. This is for safety reasons. During the manufacturing or transport, you might see a lifting plug in the fuse's place. The fuse itself is what detonates the projectiles. There are many variants to give the shell more capabilities, like air bursting with proximity or timed fuses, but perhaps the most common one is the contact fuse. This type of fuse detonates the shell when it contacts something. It can be tweaked to be more or less sensitive depending on the mission. But most commonly, the more sensitive fuses tend to be better, as they have the least amount of delay, which often translates to more damage, as the shell has less time to dig itself into the ground and sets off more easily, for example by trees, giving a makeshift airburst effect, as most of the artillery's fragments travel in a cone when it detonates. The fuse also incorporates safety features like centrifugal and setback force safeties, which means that the shell, in theory, shouldn't explode if it does not have enough rotational force and velocity, that being provided when the shell is fired and at a safe distance from the weapon. So in theory, if you dropped a fused artillery shell to the ground head first, it shouldn't explode. But personally, I wouldn't try. The outside of the shells is painted to provide protection against corrosion and display important information such as the type of the shell, often also indicated by the colors used, and manufacturing information. One of these shells costs around $1,500 to make. That price has now been increased as the demand is so high. But the point being, this is actually relatively cheap compared to many other weapons being used, like a modern Storm Shadow precision-guided missile that costs around $2 million. So for one of those, you could get around 1.3 thousand artillery shells. More modern variations of the 155mm shell include different types of guided shells, like the laser-guided Bonus Mark II that stores 2 hollow charges that independently seek out tanks from the air as the shell splits up above the target area. These have proven to be very effective at taking out Russian armor in Ukraine. Modern self-propelled gun systems like the German PzH-155, South Korean K-9 Thunder, or British AS-90 have also proven to be a much better option compared to the standard field howitzers that cannot change positions as fast and take more time to deploy when the order is given to lay the gun and fire at a target. All these aspects are what has really made the 155mm NATO standard artillery projectile one of the best shells to have ever existed when it comes to field artillery and self-propelled guns, and I don't see it being replaced anytime soon. Tell your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you want to hear more. Thanks for watching.